It's time for ROTD Weekend. So let's do a little exercise. I would like you to think of something that you make all the time these days. Something really simple. It could be a protein, your go-to protein, or a vegetable, or a salad. Just something that you make pretty regularly, like it's in your regular rotation. And think about how you make it. You just kind of go by instinct. You do it the same way all the time. Okay. Now I want you to think back a while ago, like even as far as 10 years, and try to remember how you used to cook that same thing. I'm pretty sure it has changed over time. If you think about just even your kitchen might have been different, your tools might have been different, your go-to techniques might have been different. It has probably changed. Okay, think back to the way you used to make it. Now, I'm going to challenge you to try making that thing that you've been making for all this time the same way you used to make it all those years ago, because sometimes it leads to total rediscovery, which is what happened to me over the past week or so. I say the past week or so because I tried something I used to do once with one thing and then tried it with something else and then tried it with something else. And so it spurred a whole new rediscovery. And I'm going to tell you about it now. But I want you to be thinking about something that has maybe changed for you as well and that you can maybe go back and try. Because I think it's totally true that our cooking, our skills improve as we go. But there's also something great about that first way we learned to cook something and did it all the time back then. It was probably good. That's why we did it that way, Okay. So what exactly was I talking about? What did I do? So you guys know that I tend to buy salmon with the skin on, and I love to cook it under the broiler or even in a frying pan in such a way that I get that really crispy salmon skin. But way back in the day, I did not know that you could eat salmon skin, and I didn't know how to take salmon skin off of a piece of salmon. And so what I used to do was get salmon fillets. That's what I say. You could say salmon fillets if you'd like, but I would get the salmon fillets with the skin already removed. And the first way that I learned to cook them was to pan roast them, where you start with them in a hot skillet on the stove and then flip them and transfer them to the oven. And so there is a recipe from way back a long time ago on Cook the Story for how to cook salmon in that way. And it actually is a fairly popular recipe. People visit it all the time, and I know it's good. I remember it being good, but I hadn't done it in a long time. And I decided to record a video showing how to do it because people go to it. Maybe they want to see how. And I hadn't done it in a while, So I followed my recipe from all that time ago, and I was blown away. It was such good salmon. It had a nice brown crust on the top when it was done, just a very subtle browning on the bottom, but not a crust, and so juicy, just perfectly cooked, flaky, just really, really flavorful, perfectly cooked salmon, and I was in love with it. Now, will I stop doing the crispy skin salmon that I discovered more recently? No, but when the salmon fillets that don't have the skin on are on sale, or I get them for some other reason, I have an amazing go-to recipe, and it is so worth trying. Okay, so rediscovering how good salmon was cooked that way made me realize that I used to cook a whole bunch of things like that and had stopped doing it. I still do steaks sometimes that way, and I know I've talked to you about that when they're really thick in particular, and the tri-tip, starting them on the stove and then transferring them. But for thinner cuts, I stopped doing that a long time, and I either just do them on the stove or I grill them. And that was the case for pork chops. I don't know when it changed. I used to always start them on the stove and then finish them in the oven. And there is a recipe on Cook the Story for how to cook pork chops perfectly that does that. And I used to do it all the time. But for years now, I have been doing them either on the grill or just on the stove. And so I got myself some nice big juicy bone-in pork chops this past week. And I followed that older technique of mine. Well, not just mine, of many, many people's, of starting on the stove and finishing them in the oven. And they were so juicy and delicious. I was like, how did I stop doing this? I mean, I kind of know because just throwing them on the grill is easier and doesn't involve a pan and having the oven preheated as well as using the stove. Like, I totally get how that evolved, but I'm so sad that I spent all these years like not doing it that old way, at least some of the time, you know? So all of that to say, it is very, very worthwhile to think back to how you used to cook things and give them a try, because there was probably a good reason for why you were doing that. You know what I mean? Okay, and I would love to hear from you if this spurs a memory. If you're like, oh my goodness, she's right. I used to cook, I don't know, broccoli. I used to steam it all the time and now I roast it. Roasting's better, but hey, I'll try steaming it. And you try it and it's good, especially with a little lemon pepper on there. I'm saying I want to know about it. So email me at cookthestory@gmail.com and tell me what has changed and how you used to do things. And if you're going to give that a try, I would love to know. I will, of course, link to the recipes that I mentioned in the show notes for this podcast episode. So that pan roasted salmon and the how to cook pork chops perfectly. I will also link to my grilled pork chop recipe and to that crispy skinned broiled salmon for you as well, because if you haven't tried that, you should try that too, even though it is my new way. The new way is good and the old way is good too. So try them all. On the topic of doing something now that we used to do, I have a wonderful guest. We have talked with her before, but this is a brand new conversation. Today, I'm talking with Kathy Berget from Beyond the Chicken Coop. And you know, Kathy lives in Idaho and has this amazing garden. And today she's telling us about what she loves to can because, you know, it is coming into that season when we are planting and thinking about preserving all that good stuff. And the thing is, I used to garden back when I lived in Canada. In Toronto, I had a big garden. My parents, when I was growing up, had a big garden. My grandparents had a big garden. But here in Florida, I do not really understand the seasons and I don't know what to plant when. And I kind of joke sometimes that I cannot keep very many things alive at a time. And right now my focus is on my kids and myself. And so the plants in the garden do not thrive. That would be saying it mildly. But, you know, it's a little bit of that, you know, having kids, having a family, it becomes harder. When I was kid-free, it was much easier, but you know, they're getting older and I feel like I'm like on the cusp of empty nesting a little bit sometimes. And I'm feeling a little more inspired to get out and garden, plant some things, discover how to can and preserve the way that my grandmother and my mom did a little bit too. So it is in that theme of trying things that we used to do that makes me so delighted to be talking today with Kathy Berget. Like I said, she is from Beyond the Chicken Coop. And you're going to love this conversation. Kathy is so down to earth and enthusiastic and knowledgeable about both growing things and preserving them. So she is the right person to talk to. Let's listen. Hi, Kathy. Welcome back.
Hi, it's so great to be back on the show.
I'm happy to be talking with you again. Now, it is the very, very beginning of summer, or I guess unofficial beginning of summer. And I know you have the wonderful garden, everything going on. What are you getting into now? What are you excited about? What's happening there?
Yeah, so we do have a garden and we have long winter. So the gardening season for us is really fun. It's a great time to get outside and we try to plant as much as we can that we can harvest and use for later. Our gardening season starts a little bit later than a lot of places, but we do start to harvest some things fairly early, like rhubarb comes on right away as soon as it gets warm enough. And then we'll start to have some berries here coming up pretty soon, hopefully.
Yeah. And is that just like wonderful bounty harvest, eat the rhubarb? I used to eat it dipped in sugar, or do you do something with the berries and the rhubarb?
Yeah, so I do can a lot, but I was like you too growing up. I always loved eating rhubarb just straight off the stalk or dipped a little bit in sugar. I love to cook with rhubarb right off the get-go when it comes on, make jam with it and can that jam to save in our pantry to use all year, or I freeze it too. And then you can just pull it out and use it in your recipes just like you would if it was fresh.
Oh, that makes sense. If you freeze it, you could still use it in like a cobbler or rhubarb pie. Do you do pies with rhubarb?
I have a rhubarb raspberry pie that's really good.
Ooh, that
And
sounds
that's kind of
amazing.
fun. Yeah. Just about
So,
anything works with rhubarb.
and then with the berries, do you get enough that you could be doing lots of things with them, or are you just like eating them as they come
Oh,
in?
I love to eat them. That's one of my favorite things, especially raspberries when they come on. And that'll be a little bit later toward midsummer, but we freeze those and we also can and make jams with those. And that's the big thing. And the main thing that I can is a lot of tomatoes. Once our tomatoes come on, I love to can those and using water bath canner and just stock our pantry shelves. So I'll do like stewed tomatoes or canned tomatoes, tomato sauce. The stewed tomatoes use a pressure canner rather than the water bath canner, but we do as much as we can so that whatever we're growing and we can't eat right away, we try to preserve and use them throughout the year, especially in the wintertime. There's nothing better than pulling a jar of your tomatoes off the shelf and using them in a recipe.
I have to tell you, I know nothing about this, and it's something I'm vaguely embarrassed about because I grew up, my grandparents, my parents had these big gardens. And we were always in amongst them, eating the rhubarb dipped in the sugar. We would take the rhubarb stalks to the kitchen and my Baba would give us a little glass of sugar. And she was always canning. And it is not something that I have picked up. I suspect it's something that I will do when I'm a little bit older and feel like I want to reconnect and have a little bit more time. I think it sounds like something I'll do, but I know nothing about it. And so you said a whole bunch of words there. So a pressure canner and a water bath canner. I'm not even sure what a canner is. So
Oh, okay.
maybe can you step back and tell me those things? Because I would love to learn.
So, first of all, what your grandparents did back in the day, and even our parents did, canning recipes have changed throughout time. And the more that researchers know about food and how it reacts and the safety precautions for food, the recipes have changed. So I really try to use recipes and recommendations from the USDA and from the National Center for Home Food Preservation. They have tested and researched these recipes. And so some things that have changed are sometimes the timing that you're using or some of the ingredients that you're using to make certain that what you're putting on your shelf and you pull it off 3, 4 months later is going to be safe for you to consume.
Oh, so what were people doing before that wasn't necessarily as safe? Do you know?
So there's two basic types of canning. There's a water bath canning where you're filling your jars, putting the lids on and the rings on, and you're submerging the jars in water, putting a lid on it, and then bringing it to a boil and boiling it for a certain amount of time. Some of those times have changed depending on what they have determined it needs to be boiled. When you're boiling it, it's bringing the contents of your jars up to a higher temperature. And then a really important thing is the amount of time that you boil something at for your water bath canning depends on what your elevation is. And so you're probably closer to sea level. And so yours would be a certain amount of minutes. And I'm about 2,000 feet in elevation. So I have to increase my boiling time. So those things have changed a lot. So knowing what the current recipes are and what you need to do is really important.
That's a great tip. Thank you so much. I had no idea. Okay, so the water bath canning is with your jars with the lids on in the water boiling, and I guess it sounds a little bit like pasteurizing in a way, right? Like you're bringing that up to
Yeah.
temperature. And then, so then what was the other one you mentioned? Pressure?
Oh, so there's also pressure canning. So water bath canning is typically for high acid foods like your jams, pickles, tomatoes, and pressure canning is for your low acid foods. So things like your vegetables, string beans, carrots, stewed tomatoes, because they often have celery and onions added to those. So those need a higher temperature than you can achieve in a water bath canner. So your jars are put into a pressure canner, the lid is put on and it's sealed, and then you bring the temperature and the pressure canner up above a boiling temperature. And it's actually, you seal off that pressure canner with a lid and it's a little vent valve on there to prevent any steam from coming out. You raise your pressure to a certain level, depending on your elevation. Again, it's going to vary. And then you keep it at that pressure for whatever the recommended time is for whatever you're canning. Maybe it's 10, 20 minutes. Fish would also be one that might be 110 minutes. And it's kept in that pressure canner so that the internal contents of the jars are raised above what you could achieve in just a boiling water.
Oh, wow. That is so interesting. And yeah, I had no idea that these things had changed, but I shouldn't be surprised. We are learning new scientific things all the time and perfecting cooking, and that's changing also. So, wow, that's really great. So of all your produce that you're harvesting through the year, what are your favorite things to can?
Definitely tomatoes. I love eating the tomatoes, but then canning them, and especially just canned whole tomatoes just with water in them, or the tomato sauce, because I use those all year long too in almost everything.
So do you use them in place of like when a recipe calls for diced tomatoes, like any kind of store-bought canned tomato, you're using your fresh ones instead?
Yes, until I run out. Then I have to buy the canned tomatoes at the store. But I do. So I'll just use them like in chilies and soups and spaghetti sauce. I'll use my own canned tomatoes.
And I'm guessing the answer is yes, but do they taste better than the store-bought canned tomatoes?
I guess it depends on the store-bought canned tomatoes, honestly. Yeah. And once you add the tomatoes to something else, you're not going to notice a difference between what you're buying at the store, your home canned tomatoes. For me, it's the fact that I knew that I grew these, that I've canned them, so I know what's in them. I often don't add salt, which is optional. And I just know the whole process that they've gone through. And I know that I've created this food. It's more about that than the actual taste for me for tomatoes.
Yeah. So it's the sort of fulfilling. It's that I used to get this feeling when I used to go to my parents' cottage by myself. I would go and I'd take out the pedal boat and I would go fish in the lake. And actually, it's what we were talking about before we started recording. I would catch pickerel, walleye, and I would take them back to the cottage and I would fillet them and bread them and have them for my own little dinner by myself. And I felt like the most powerful, incredible person on the planet. Like I made this food happen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. It just takes you back to your roots and makes you feel so grounded.
Yeah. Grounded and capable. Yeah. Really great feeling. So yes, tomatoes, fish. I think I get that feeling sometimes with like baking bread too. Like it's just such a basic, yes, of course I can go to the store like you can get the bread or get the canned tomatoes. Of course it's there, but that you can do that simple, basic thing yourself somehow feels really, really special.
Same.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, Kathy, I love hearing about your gardening, and we should have you back in the fall to talk about your fall harvest. I would love that.
Ooh.
Yeah, let's do that. I'm going to put that on my calendar.
Okay, I'd love that too.
For now, have you brought a recipe to tell me about today?
I have, and I'll just forewarn you, it has nothing to do with what's growing in my garden or things that we've canned, but it's definitely a favorite recipe that we have in our house.
That is totally fine. If it is your recipe, I know it's going to be delicious. What are you bringing today?
Ooh, so one of my favorite things to eat or order when we go out for Mexican food are chicken fajitas. I love everything about them, the flavor and making your own little taco with your plate of food with all of the different accompaniments that come with it. And I love chicken fajitas, but I don't like the fuss of making chicken fajitas at home. So I have a recipe for chicken fajita casserole that has all the flavor, but none of the fuss.
I love that. And you're so right. We do various things like this at my house all the time because everybody likes different foods. And so you can sort of make your own like fajita bowl or burrito bowl or whatever. But it really is. You've got the peppers and the onions and you've got the chicken. You've got to cook those things and then all the various toppings and your tortillas need to heat up. And then you want it kind of sizzling as it comes to the table. Like the whole thing is kind of a better kept for the restaurant.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so where do you start with this casserole?
Okay, so the casserole itself is going to have the chicken and the peppers and the onions, and that's all baked together. And then on the side, you're going to have your tortillas, maybe salsa, sour cream, guacamole, whatever it is that you like on there. So we start with 2 chicken breasts, and I use boneless, skinless chicken breast. You could use thighs too if you preferred that cut of meat. You're going to want them boneless and skinless though. And I slice them into just strips. If you had young children that would prefer smaller pieces, you can cut them up into smaller pieces. When you make it yourself, you can do whatever you want with that type of thing.
For sure, yeah.
So in a large bowl, I start with a tablespoon of olive oil and a tablespoon of fajita seasoning. And I do make my own fajita seasoning. I just keep a jar in the pantry, but you can totally buy this at the store or use taco seasoning. They're almost the exact same thing. And I mix the oil and the fajita seasoning together just so that it's really nice and bloomed together, so that the fajita seasoning isn't dry anymore. And you're going to add those chicken strips right into that bowl. I use my hands and just mix everything up so that every bit of those chicken strips are well covered with that seasoning. That gets dumped into a casserole dish, like 9 by 13 inch casserole dish that's lightly greased. And then in that same bowl, I add another tablespoon of the olive oil and another tablespoon of the fajita seasoning, do the same thing. And this time I'm going to add my sliced peppers and my sliced onions and mix those all up together. I like to keep my peppers fairly thinly sliced. And when I slice my onions, instead of across the middle, I slice from pole to pole so that you get long strips of onion rather than the round pieces of onion.
Oh, that's really smart. I think I always do the round way, but because I just don't think of doing it differently. Yeah. You get those long strips instead of all the little half moons. Very smart.
It's going to taste the same, but they kind of work better for this recipe if you have the long strips of those. So you mix those all and get covered with the fajita seasoning, and you add those on top of the chicken. Oh, and then I sprinkle a little bit of cheese on top of it, just shredded cheddar cheese or mixed cheese. Fajitas don't typically have cheese on them, but I like it on this, and it's not too much, and it really kind of caramelizes on top of the mixture. And so it's just a perfect addition to these fajitas.
Yeah, no, I that makes sense to me. I think often there's like shredded cheese is served as one of the toppings, which is fine, but cheese is always better when it's melted.
Right?
Yeah.
I totally think so. So this all goes into a preheated 350-degree oven, uncovered, and you bake it for about 30 to 35 minutes until the chicken is fully baked. And you want that at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit, and pull it out. Just let it rest for a couple of minutes so that you're not losing all the juices. Then you serve it. And I just serve the whole casserole dish on the table, along with, I heat up some tortillas. I usually you can use flour or corn, whatever you prefer, just like at the restaurant. And I heat those up so that they're nice and warm. You can do them in the oven and wrapped in foil, or right on a cast iron griddle, or if you have a gas stove, you can even heat it right on that burner itself. And I serve it with all my favorite toppings: salsa, guacamole, sometimes some cilantro. And then we serve them, and everybody just dishes up and makes their own little fajita tacos out of those.
Oh, that's really, really fun. And yeah, definitely just a little bit more hands-off and easier for the bulk of the cooking on that recipe. That sounds delicious.
It's really yummy. Like I said, it's one of our favorites, and it is a little bit different than how they serve them in the restaurant, but the flavors are still there. So it's spot on in that regard.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And I'm betting that later in the summer, you have garden bell peppers that are making their way into here.
Well, we do a lot of spicy peppers like jalapenos and Anaheims. For some reason, the sweet bell peppers don't do as well here. And I don't know why that is, because you think if one did really well, the other one wouldn't. And so we don't grow the bell peppers.
I used to have a little garden in Toronto, and I think that bell peppers was one of the things that I could not get to grow also. So maybe they're just a little extra finicky.
Yeah, and I would say also we make more space for our chili peppers rather than the sweet peppers. So maybe that's one of the reasons too. And we just give those more attention for whatever reason. So, and honestly, my husband is not a huge fan of bell peppers. He'll eat them in ingredients, but he's much more into the chili peppers, the spicy ones. And so he does much more of the gardening than I do. So I'm thinking maybe that also has something to do with if we don't grow them.
He's the culprit. There you go. Well, Kathy, this has been wonderful as always. I always love talking with you. Can you let everyone know where they can find you online if they want to see your recipes and maybe a little glimpse into that beyond the chicken coop life?
Yeah. So everything can be found online at beyondthechickencoop.com. And then on social media, on Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram, it's Beyond the Chicken Coop.
Very easy. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine.
I do love the idea of Kathy's chicken fajita casserole. I will tell you, and this probably doesn't surprise you, that one of my complaints about fajitas is that the cheese isn't usually melted. It's like shredded and on the side. And I love melted ooey gooey cheese, which you can get to perfection if you're baking it all together in a baking dish, right? So I am super excited to scoop that cheesy, chickeny pepper and onion mixture into tortillas and dig in. I hope you are too. Don't forget to follow Kathy Beyond the Chicken Coop and go check out that recipe on beyondthechickencoop.com. I will link to the recipe and to Kathy in the show notes for this podcast episode. As to what is happening in my kitchen this week, just a little bit. The first part is actually quite easy. So I already have a blackened chicken recipe on the Cookful, and I was doing a video for it and realized that I have to make up blackened seasoning to make the recipe. And so I decided to come up with the measurements to make a full batch of it, like a half cup to put in a spice jar. And I just need to mix that larger batch up and photograph it this week. And that makes me super happy because I will have a batch of blackened seasoning on my pantry door, which is going to come in very handy because I love it on so many things. I was talking about salmon and pork chops at the top of this show. It is wonderful on both of those as well as on that chicken, right? So I am working on that. And then also I am working on a creamy shrimp pasta. And I think inspired by some of the garlicky, buttery shrimp recipes that I've been doing lately, I want this to be an extra garlicky, creamy shrimp pasta. So I am testing that recipe this week, and if it goes well, I will be taking pictures and videos of that one also. As to what is going live on the sites this week on Cook the Story, we have that Tex-Mex shrimp bowl. I know I've been telling you about how I make the best pan-fried shrimp, and this recipe merges those pan-fried shrimp with my family's favorite steak burrito bowl recipe, although of course not with the steak. It has the shrimp instead of the steak, but yeah, it's the same idea as those, and we have that kind of thing for dinner all the time, and so it's about time that the recipe made its way onto the site. And then the other one is for my favorite avocado toast recipe. And you heard me talk about the avocado toast seasoning recipe yesterday on Friday. And this avocado toast is kind of like the hybrid version of that with fresh ingredients. So you can either mix up a batch of the avocado toast seasoning and just use that, or you can use a bunch of fresh ingredients like chopped up tomatoes and red onion and that kind of thing, and then a little bit of seasoning and do that. Or you can go somewhere in between, right? You can use onion powder instead of the chopped onions. You can use that tomato powder I've been telling you about instead of the fresh tomato. So you could kind of go in either direction. So that recipe, it's actually called avocado tomato toast. That is going live on the Cookful on Monday. So both delicious things to try. And I can't link to those yet for you in the show notes because they are not quite live yet, but you will find that Tex-Mex shrimp bowl on cookthestory.com and the avocado toast on thecookful.com. As to what I'm telling you about on this podcast this week, well, the Tex-Mex shrimp bowl is there. The avocado toast did not make the cut. It looks like it's going live on the podcast next week, even though it's going on the site this week. I've also got, those pork chops, the old way that I used to cook them. I am talking about that this week. And, some grilled tri-tip, and maybe, I keep telling you I'm going to do those smoked barbecue chicken breasts, the redo of the episode, because I'm doing them slightly differently than I told you, but I haven't gotten around to writing up the blog post for it yet. Maybe it'll happen this week. Maybe it won't. Stay tuned. The way you stay tuned is to make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast so that you get a new episode every single day. To do that, go to your favorite podcast app on your phone and search for Recipe of the Day. Once you get there, and you'll find me there, you will click on or tap on subscribe or follow, and then you'll get a new episode in your feed every day. Or go to cookthestory.com/ROTD and you can subscribe from the buttons at the top there. There's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the good places where you can follow this podcast. I want to say a big thank you to Kathy Berget from Beyond the Chicken Coop for all of that amazing information and the delicious recipe. Don't forget to go check her out, Beyond the Chicken Coop. And a big thank you to you for listening. I'm really happy you're out there. I love talking food with you. Don't forget to email me about something that you used to make differently than you make today. I want to hear. That is at cookthestory@gmail.com. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookville.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great weekend. Let's get cooking.